Okay, so Ruth, part 2. Okay, so Ruth is only a 2-part book. So next week we will be beginning in 1 Samuel. But let's kind of just really quick recap where we are in the story. Okay, because last week we did chapter 1. Right, so Naomi has lost everything. Right, her husband died, her 2 sons died, and so she had originally left from Bethlehem to Moab because there was a famine, and now everyone's dead except for her 2 daughters-in-law. And one of them comes back to Bethlehem with her, right? Because she finds out that, okay, hey, we left because there was famine, and that famine is over, and I've got nothing here in Moab. Let me go back to Judah, to Bethlehem, and kind of just start over and survive, because at least that's where my family is. And so Ruth comes with her, and while she's in the pits of despair, there's no realistic way out. I mean, if she's going back not because she's thinking, okay, this will be good, I've got friends there, it's more of just, this is the best option I've got out of the worst options, right? And you might know what that feels like, right? You might be in a place right now in your life where you're thinking, wow, this is as worst as it gets, and I've got no options, no future. As you kind of look to see what you can do, you don't see it. Right? You might be there right now, or you might have been there before, and you remember what it was like to kind of have life just with no prospects. Or everything's going well, and stuff is about to happen where you're going to feel this way, right? When it comes to life, that's one of the places you are. You're either in the pits, you just came out of the pits, or you don't even know it yet. There's a real big hole in your life, and you're about to fall in, right? It's one of those 3. And then after you get out or whatever, you just repeat. That's pretty much life. Just repeat that over and over again, okay? And this is often, but when you're in the pits, this is often when God shows up. And I don't know why that's the case, okay? But a lot of times when you kind of look back at your life and you ask yourself, when did God really reveal himself? When did God really make himself known in a deep and meaningful way? You'll look back and think, oh yeah, it was during these times. And I don't know why. My educated guess is that these stories, these things that you go through in life, they make for the best stories of life. If you think about movies and that kind of stuff, this is the stuff that makes it interesting. And if God wants the best for us, maybe he wants you to have a great story as well. Can you imagine if you were an actor and actress and you had a friend who was like a big-time producer, director, you're like, hey, put me in a part, make me a star. And that director or producer says, okay, you're the star of the movie. Here's how it's going to go. Your character, born, middle class, maybe upper middle class, richest country in the world. You're like, okay, everything falls apart, right? No, your parents send you to a really good school, and you make pretty good decisions. And it's like, you go to college. Like, oh, college, yeah, what is it? What's going to happen? You study hard, and you graduate, and you got an internship, and you got a job. Oh, I know how the story goes. Terrible boss. Well, I mean, bosses are, you get a job, and you're responsible, and you make sure you don't squander your money. You put it into your 401k, and you're like, oh, okay, alien invasion, World War III, something like, well, I mean, maybe, no, you're going to raise a family, and you're going to be able to retire at a comfortable age. And because you've saved up, and you looked at the long-term market, and you didn't invest in anything crazy, yeah. And then what happens? Well, then you get old, and then you eventually, everyone dies at some point, That's your story. It's going to be awesome. And you're going to be like, I don't think this is going to make me a star, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think we should, like, pursue good decisions so calamity doesn't fall upon you, right? But it just doesn't happen in life very often. Like, stuff happens and things fall apart. And that's when God shows up. And sometimes it's because God says, I want you to have this story. That when, life is gone after 50, 60, 70 years, you can look back and say, look at these moments of despair and look at how God has shown up. I think that's my educated guess of why oftentimes in those terrible times God shows up. Like that's my educated guess. Because so many believers, if you ask them, they'll say, yeah, I wouldn't change anything. All those terrible things or all the problems in life, I wouldn't have changed anything because in that time, God was with me. Okay, and so that's kind of where Naomi and Ruth are. Okay, let me give you the super fast version of the rest of the story. Okay, because we're gonna spoil everything. Okay, this is not one of those like cliffhangers. You're like, wow, I didn't see that coming. This is what happens. Okay, so they've got nothing. So Ruth starts to go to different fields and goes to a field and gathers grain, right? Because she can't get a job because that's not how it works back then, right? So I'm going to gather grain left by people, and she meets a nice man named Boaz, right? In that society, there's this practice called where somebody is a guardian redeemer, and it's basically a practice of if you are in serious difficulty, someone kind of in your family is supposed to kind of redeem you and kind of take care of you. That's just kind of how that society works. And they find out that that Boaz is a part of Naomi's family. So Boaz is a guardian redeemer. Okay, and so Naomi tells Ruth this, and although Boaz is not like the closest in line because there's a kind of hierarchy of this, he redeems Naomi and marries Ruth, and they live happily ever after. Okay, so that's what happens. Okay, so now let's go back into chapters 2, 3, and 4 and kind of dig a little deeper. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, but at least now you know what has happened. Okay, so chapter 2, enter Boaz. Okay, what is Ruth doing here? Okay, I'm going to read verse 2 and then 5 to 7. And we'll find out what she's doing, right? And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Okay, then we jump to verse 5. And this is after Boaz comes into the picture. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. And so Ruth was working hard just to survive. Right? She's just like, hey, I'm going to just pick whatever is left and hope I can gather enough to like make bread and stuff. Okay. Do you ever feel like that's what you're doing? That in your life, you're just working to survive. You're not really building anything or like doing some great thing. You're just like, let me just get through day after day. And I'm not talking about just like career-wise. I'm talking about even just if you don't have a job, just like everything you do day by day is just like a slog. You're just barely surviving. That is Ruth, right? And she knew this was a real possibility. When she came back, she knew, I'm a Moabite. They don't really like me over there in Judea, but I'm committed to Naomi. I'm going to do this, and this is all I've got. This is all I can do to survive. Right? Do you ever feel like that? I think all of us do at some point, right? Whether it's now, we have, or we will in the future. And so now let's take a look at what Boaz is like, and this is where we're going to focus on in chapter 2. What is Boaz like? Right? So I'm going to read a couple verses here and there, and then we'll see like who Boaz really is. Okay, so verse 4 to 5, it says, so Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? So right off the bat, we see that Boaz is a person who always has God at the front of his mind. Right? Like the first thing he says is, Lord be with you. And so that's kind of a person he is. The second thing we see is that he notices the less fortunate. He sees his harvesters, and then he immediately noticed, hey, there's someone here who is kind of just like picking up the scraps. And so he notices this person. Okay, that's what Boaz is like. And then we jump to verse 8 and 9. It says, so Boaz said to Ruth, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. The second thing we see about Boaz is he protects, right? So this, again, she's not one of his employees or any workers. She's just there because she's basically like begging, but she's like just scrapping around and getting whatever she can, right? And so Boaz sees this and knows, you know what? Some people in other fields may not treat her very well, especially since she's not even Israelite, right? And so he knows that this is not the safest thing to do, and so he says to her, no, stay here. I've kind of already told them to like leave you alone and you can do this, right? Boaz is a protector. And then we move on to verse 15 and 16. It says, as she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, let her gather among the sheaves, even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. Right here we see Boaz is someone who provides, and he is someone who dignifies. You can see that some people might look at Ruth and say like, oh, she's like this freeloader. She's not even working, like she shouldn't even be here, right? And I'm going to be so efficient with my harvesting, there will be nothing for her to pick up. And in a sense, they would be right to do that, right? Because she's not supposed to be here, right? But Boaz, what does Boaz say? Boaz says, hey, leave her alone, let her do this. And in fact, while you are gathering, just like pull some on, just drop it. Right? Let her get enough. Right? And so he provides for her and he gives her dignity. Right? There's a dignity here because for her to be here, right? Anybody who has to kind of get to this level doesn't feel real dignified. And Boaz does that. He provides and he dignifies. The lesson here is not that, oh, this is what a man should be like. This is how you treat women. That is not the lesson. Okay? Now, I will say, men and boys, we should probably be like Boaz. He's a good guy, right? Like he's a good man. So that is a lesson, but it's not the lesson. The lesson here is that Boaz's character is what all Christ followers should be like, because this is what Jesus is like, right? So Boaz has these characteristics of having God on his mind, that he notices and cares for the less fortunate. He's a protector, provider, and a dignifier. But these characteristics is what Christ is like. And so for all of us, whether you're a man or a woman, like the lesson here is these are the characteristics. This is what Jesus is like, and we should follow suit. Okay? So now, that was chapter 2. We're in chapter 3. The threshing floor, okay? So just before I go on, threshing floor, what does that even mean? Okay, so here's how they did things back then because, they didn't have big, giant machines, okay? You have to separate, like, the grain from, like, the outer husk from the wheat, or in this case, barley, okay? And that's a pain. Because imagine if you're just, like peeling, like, clementines or something like that, just, like, all day. No, there's a better way to do this. Because the grain is heavier than the outer covering. So if you can get to like a hill that's a little bit higher up, that's windy, and you can somehow just like break the grain from the husk, and then you take your winnowing fork and you just kind of like toss it in the air, just toss all this stuff. the wind will blow the lighter husk away, and then the heavier grain will fall, right? Pretty smart, right? A lot of times we think that, today we have all this technology, that people in the past were like dumb and we're smart. But then if you actually just look at what we do today, humanity hasn't gotten any smarter in thousands of years. We just have better technology. But we're just as dumb as we were thousands of years ago, okay? But this is a cool thing. So that's what they do, all right? And so that's what a threshing floor is, okay? Okay, so what does Naomi do in chapter 3? In verse 1 to 4, it says this: "My daughter, I must find a home for you. Now Boaz is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. When he lies down, go and uncover his feet and lie down." Okay? Okay, I need to clarify something. Naomi is not asking Ruth to be real sketchy, or as young people say, sus, right? He is not asking Ruth to be like anything like, not ladylike, okay? What's happening, this is one of those things where you got to know the culture, right? The message that Naomi is telling Ruth to give to Boaz by doing this is basically saying, you are a guardian redeemer, and I'm asking you to fulfill your duty as a guardian redeemer. That's the message, right? We just don't understand that because, I don't know, if I'm sleeping and somebody just goes, now you have cold feet, we would not get that message. But back then, Boaz would understand. He's like, right, just that's just how it is, okay? And how does Boaz respond? All right, this is verse 8 and 9, and then 11 to 13. It says, "In the middle of the night, something startled the man. 'Who are you?' he asked. 'I am your servant Ruth,' she said. 'Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family.'" And then verse 11, Boaz says, I will do for you all you ask. There is another one who is more closely related than I. If he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. If he is not willing, I will do it." So he says, yes, okay, I hear your message loud and clear, and yes, I will do this, but there's a hierarchy, and there's someone who actually is supposed to be doing this before I am. All right? And again, this really shows Boaz's character, right? He understands and he respects his society and how they do things, and he says, I will do this, but let's kind of go through the proper channels, okay? So we get to chapter 4. Wedding bells, okay? And so what does Boaz do here? So he meets with the town elders and this guardian redeemer that is actually supposed to be doing this, the one next in line. And in verse 3 and 4, he says to them, "Hey, Naomi is selling the piece of land that belonged to Elimelech." Elimelech is Naomi's dead husband. Okay. "I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it. If you will redeem it, do so, for no one has the right to do it except you. And I am next in line. I will redeem it." I will redeem it, he said. That's the guardian redeemer saying, okay, yeah, I will redeem it. And so the guardian redeemer says yes, because who doesn't want more land? Right? That's like a general principle, right? Actually, now it's a little different. Back in the days, everyone's like, hey, you want to buy, don't rent, buy, right? Because you don't want to be paying rent. Of course, now prices are so skyrocketing, and actually, if you do the math out, buying and renting, well, it depends on where you are and how things are going, or which one's better. But back in the days when things were normal, your parents would all said to you, don't buy the BMW, save up and buy a house, okay? Things have changed a little bit, but in general, that's still normal, right? And so this guy's like, oh yeah, I get like dibs on this land. It's like, sure, I'll buy it. It's more land for me. This is good stuff. And so what does the guardian redeemer do in the end? Look at verse 5 and 6. Then Boaz said, "You also acquire Ruth in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer says, "Oh, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate." Okay, and so just pause real quick. what's happening here? This is not an endorsement of their culture and how we should treat women. Because you'll notice the language here is very much like women are being owned and that kind of stuff. Like, oh, you acquire Ruth, right? This is not an endorsement of how culture and how we should do things. This is simply, this is how it was back then and how God works within that, okay? So be very clear about that. This is not an endorsement of the culture or how we should treat women, right? So the guardian redeemer here backs out. Why does he back out? Because he doesn't want to split his inheritance, or the inheritance he's going to give his children anymore, okay? The land gained in this deal is simply not worth it. He did the math, right? He looked at what he had, he looked at this piece of land, and he said, how much more value does it add to my wealth? But wait, if I marry Ruth and we have kids, then I'm going to have to split it even more. And he looked at it and says, no, the kids I have now, it's the one, he doesn't really, not interested in marrying Ruth, right? Like the kids I have now, that actually decreases what they get, right? It's just a math equation for him, right? And he says, no, I'm not going to do it. This piece of land is not worth what extra responsibilities I have. And so Boaz says, fine. Boaz buys the land, marries Ruth, redeems Naomi, and the rest is history. And so let's take a look at what does everyone get out of this whole deal, okay? The guardian redeemer, he and his family get to keep their wealth, right? Like they don't have to then split it with anyone else, right? By not taking the land, whatever they had, they get to keep, and everybody gets maximum value. Okay, that's what they get. Naomi, what does Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz get? Well, Naomi and Ruth get taken care of, right? Like so, their physical needs, like their life, they are taken care of by Boaz, by becoming a part of Boaz's family. That's like the small part. A lot of people focus on that and are like, oh yeah, that's great, right? Like Naomi, like you came back with nothing, and Ruth, you had no prospect, and now look, you're in this family, and they actually have land. That's like huge. Like you made it, girl. That is sure. What do they really get? They all get their names written in the Bible. They get their story told in Scripture. They get to be in the genealogy of King David and ultimately Jesus, the Messiah. That's the big one. That's the thing that actually lasts, right? Like, yeah, okay, so the rest of your life, you're comfortable, you can eat whatever you like, and then you die, right? But what do they really get? They get legacy. And they didn't know that. When they made this decision, when Boaz made the decision to fulfill the duty of the guardian redeemer, he was just being faithful to what he's supposed to do, right? He was just trying to be a man following the Lord and being a good man. He had no idea that this decision would enshrine him in the Bible. Like, I don't know about you, but like I don't need the big long story. Like if I just got my name in the Bible in like just a list, I'd be like, there. I mean, if you guys like worked on a movie and in the credits, and it was like a really awesome movie, you'd be like, wait, right there. Did you see it? Right? You would be so excited, like that was me. I was a boom mic operator. That was awesome. Like you would be so excited about that. Think about what it'd be like to be in the Bible. Sometimes I wonder if that's what genealogies of the Bible are partly about. No, it's bigger than that, right? But partly it's just to be like, it's a shout out, right? It's like all the people who are like, God's like, shout them out, look at that, like just, yay, my family name is in there, right? They get that. That's so much better than anything in this life. The guardian redeemer, on the other hand, the original guy, yeah, he got to keep his wealth, but he's forgotten. We don't even know his name. That's why I keep calling him the guardian redeemer. The Bible does not tell us who this guy is, right? he's forgotten. He's just like a guy who didn't do his duty, and like, I don't know who is he, right? I don't know who he is. All of that, he made that choice just for the sake of earthly wealth. From an earthly perspective, he made the right decision, right? He was a finance major, and so he like, acquisition, here we go. Did the math out. He was like, no, this is not a good investment, guys. Shut it down, not doing it. And you know what? I think for the rest of his life, he would have said, oh, I totally made the right decision. Like Boaz, like, all right, Boaz, good for you, buddy. Yeah, you got a wife, and you got this piece of land that really didn't do much, because if it did a lot, if that land was worth a lot, then Naomi would have been able to take herself with that land, right? But clearly this land wasn't that valuable, right? And he's forgotten. And so then we ask ourselves, like, who really made the wise choice? Boaz made the wise choice, not the guardian redeemer, even though from an earthly perspective, we can objectively say the guardian redeemer made the better choice from an earthly perspective. But from an eternal perspective, Boaz was the one who made the right choice. And so for us today, what do we get out of this, right? Because this is bigger than just a story of property acquisition and, and how we treat women, right? This is bigger than that. What does it mean for us today, the book of Ruth? I think the first thing is this: we have to know that Jesus is the ultimate Boaz, okay? Remember, all Scripture points to Jesus. Even when you have like no idea how all Scripture points to Jesus. Boaz's characteristics are good, right? He had God on his mind. He noticed and cared for the less fortunate. He's a protector, provider, and a dignifier. But Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of those characteristics, right? Boaz did this in a small time in history for one specific family. Jesus does this for all of us, for all of humanity, and what he does and how he provides and protects is for eternity, right? And so as we look at this, we see, okay, Boaz, good job, buddy. You're a great guy. But then it really points to how Jesus will come, and he will be the ultimate guardian redeemer. He redeems all of us, because all of us, when it comes to our spirit, starts off spiritually dead, right? All of us had no hope to be reconciled with God. And Jesus comes and redeems us. Okay, so Jesus is the ultimate Boaz. That's the first thing. Second thing is this: be like Boaz, be like Jesus. Okay, I want to read 2 verses to you. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1 says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. And then Ephesians 5, verse 1 to 2. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walking in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. We look at the character of Boaz and see what he's like, see his integrity, and we should be like that. Right? Whether you're a man or a woman, it's not about how men treat women. It's just that's how we should be like, because that's how Jesus is like. And the third thing and last one is this: God's redemption is far greater than you can imagine in this life and in the next. Again, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz weren't thinking about how important this decision, how important their lives would be in the eternal perspective. They were just focused on their life here and now, and they were being faithful to the Lord and what they've got here and now. And yet, it was so much bigger. Their redemption story is so much bigger, right? They weren't thinking about how they were going to be remembered. They were just thinking about now. And here's the thing: that's the same thing in our lives. You may go through life and you may have different decisions you have to make, whether it's going to be a decision that is Christ-like or a decision that is more selfish, right? Even though the selfish one might make more sense. And we just don't look at it that way of like, oh, does this matter? but we have no idea how it's going to play out. Just like Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz had no idea, we don't either. But as you love God, as you serve God, as you sacrifice for God, the gain you get is so much greater than you can imagine. Sometimes you see a glimpse of it in this life, but a lot of times you don't. A lot of times you don't see any fruit, but it can be enormous. You know, I always think, you know, some of the little things you do may not like change anybody's heart and turn anybody into a Christian, right? It may not do that, but those little things you do, those little ways you are Christ-like now, you just don't know how it's going to be, right? There's some pastors like to use the story of Billy Graham, and Billy Graham has like a testimony where he said, "This is the moment, like I became a believer at one of those like tent revivals back in the days, and there was you know, like a preacher there, right? And people would look at that preacher and be like, whoa, like your little tent revivals, look, like you got Billy Graham, like look what you did." But then the people are always like, yeah, but who is the person that spoke to that guy? And then it's always like these like afterwards, we don't know who these people are. Just like some random person, you know, like said something, but God uses those things as we love him, as we serve him, as we sacrifice for him, right? Where who knows where it's going to go, right? You may influence somebody in the future that will do incredible things to the Lord. And yeah, you just had a small part now. And we just don't know. And that's what it is. Like God's redemption is so much greater than you can ever imagine. Right? The guardian redeemer, he made the right earthly choice, the right choice for his family when it comes to building wealth and security for his family. And for the rest of his life, he was like, yep, made the right call. But for looking back now from this perspective, we're like, who was that? What was his name? Like, if you just did your duty, you know, you could have had your name in the same line as Jesus. It was that close. You already said yes, I'll buy it, and then I gotta marry Ruth. No, I'm backing out now. Right? God's redemption is far greater than you can imagine. So the question is, who will you be? Right? As you live through life, as you make everyday decisions, who will you be? I don't know about you, but like the greatest, the most important thing I do is all I really want in life is this. I want to get to stand before God after I die and just have him say Matthew 25:21, right? Part of it is, well done, good and faithful servant. Like that's all I want, right? Because if I get there and God's like, oh yeah, good job, I'm like, all right, you know, like, and I don't, you know, things like building up wealth and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, those are good, but like in the end, though, I just want to hear God say that about me. And so the question is, do you want to hear God say that, or is it just something like, well, you know, actually I can just scoot by, get into heaven, that's fine too. So let's pray.